Why does Jesus curse the fig tree? Many have asked this question because it is a strange story that stands out. In the Gospels, we have miracle after miracle and teaching after teaching, almost always to the benefit of the people Jesus meets. Yet in the middle of the story, Jesus seems to randomly curse a tree so that it withers and dies. Unfortunately, the answer you most likely heard, and the one you would find if you did just a quick search, is rather shallow and borderline meaningless. Authors and preachers will claim it was a demonstration of the authority Jesus has over nature or something similar. This makes little sense on its own, as Jesus demonstrates his authority dozens of times, and again, that usually benefits the people around him. To really understand the cursing of the fig tree, we have to take it in context. It is one of a few examples of a frame story found in Mark. We get the first half, then something else happens, and then the gospel goes all Paul Harvey, and we get the rest of the story. In Mark 11, we find Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem. He heads back to Bethany for the rest of the day, then the next day returns to Jerusalem again. It is along the way on his second trip to Jerusalem that they find a fig tree and Jesus inspects it to see if it has any fruit to eat. When he finds none, he curses it. May no one ever eat from fruit you again. This is the first part of the frame story. What comes next? The much more famous portion of the story. Jesus enters the temple and cleanses it. In his frustration, he turns over tables and chastises the market keepers. In the Gospel of Mark, this ruckus is what prompts the local religious leadership to plot to kill Jesus. He provokes them into setting the passion in motion. Jesus and his disciples again leave Jerusalem and again return for the third time the next day. The disciples notice the same fig tree again and that it had withered from its roots. Peter points it out and Jesus talks about faith. He tells them the famous line that if they had faith and no doubt, they can command mountains to be moved, giving us the expression faith to move mountains. This is where we get the vague sense that this is about authority. Perhaps Jesus means to suggest that he is so faithful and so free of doubt that he can do these sort of things that no one else can. But remember, this was a frame story. The temple had become the center of religious life in Judah and for some of the surrounding territories. Yet when Jesus went to see it, it was just like when he went to inspect the fig tree. He was checking to see if it was bearing fruit and found none. The cleansing of the temple is an event put in parallel with the cursing of the fig tree. Because Jesus saw that what was meant to be produced was not there, he put an end to what was going on. So when the disciples noticed the tree had in fact withered from the root itself, it is a comment on the temple. Mark leaves this as a sort of code for his early listeners. Though we do not know exactly when Mark was written down, it is evident that it was finalized around the time the temple was destroyed, about 40 years after these events. Being rotten from the roots meant then what it means now, that the very source of life, the very foundation of the institution, was insufficient or corrupt. This is a commentary on the religious leadership who would seek to kill Jesus. At the same time, the fact that Jesus said it will not bear any more fruit, and then it didn't, runs in parallel to the fact Jesus cleansed the temple and it would soon after be destroyed. So while this event may demonstrate Jesus' authority, it is primarily a comment on how the temple was being run, and secondarily a prophecy about what was coming next for it. Jesus, like the prophets of old, takes the stance that these institutions only stand if the people live holy and faithful lives. If the institutions and traditions get corrupted, rotten at the roots, and people use religious obligation as a way to maintain power or grow their own wealth, then God will let them fade away. This story should serve as a reminder for all people faithful to the same God that our traditions are only sacred when they serve to build people up and draw us nearer to God. If our institution, practices, even our worship, get employed for the sake of worldly power or resources, then this corruption will act as a blight on the whole. Just as God has the poor and powerless in mind, and a special preference for these least among us, God will enact justice on those who would use God's name in their evil pursuits. So what do you think? Have you heard any other explanations for this strange and famous event? Let us know down in those comments, and then follow or subscribe for more Bible stories. It just takes a few minutes a day to learn all about the Bible. God bless you. Amen.